All right, diving in today, folks, we're taking a closer look at Bob Camblin. And he's kind of a puzzle, an artist whose work, well, it just makes you think. And, you've sent us tons of stuff on him, thoughts, like little bits of his life story and how other people see his art, which can be a little mysterious, to be honest. So we're going to try to really get what he was all about, like his vision as an artist and all those deep ideas he was playing with.
Yeah, that's right. Camblin, people talk about him like he's almost a legend. Other artists respected him. He had his own style, no question. Even caused some controversy, some of his stuff. And now, well, everyone wants a piece of him, literally. His art's worth a fortune.
And we're talking thousands of pieces, right? Paintings, drawings, prints, the whole works.
Oh yeah, a huge output across the board. And hard to find, which just makes them even more valuable.
Adds to the mystery for sure. And his life story, just as unconventional. Born in Oklahoma in 1928, gets a good art education, even scores a Fulbright to Italy, teaches for years at all these different schools, but then bam, walks away from it all in 76, just dedicates himself to his art, living a pretty nomadic life, making a living off his work. Says a lot about him right there. So, where did it all begin? Like, what got him started down this path?
Well, art was in his blood from the get-go. Both parents were artists, so he grew up surrounded by it. Even in high school, he was the art director for the yearbook. So, visually minded, even then. But Ponca City, Oklahoma, where he grew up, I think that place really stayed with him. You've got the Marland Estate, this big fancy place from the oil boom days.
Yeah.
Then there's the Pioneer Woman statue, kind of iconic. And you see those double VVs pop up in his work sometimes, little hidden references. It was for his mother, Viva Camblin.
Oh, that's cool. Like little secrets in the paintings.
Right. And then think about The Wizard of Oz came out when he was a kid. Apparently he was really into it. I wonder if that had something to do with, those surreal elements in his work later on, that whole journey of self-discovery.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, we all have those things that stick with us, from childhood. But the one thing that really jumps out at me is his friendship with Forrest Harrisberger, another artist, right? Met in high school art class, bonded over what they called good vibes and a shared love of drawing. That's a pretty solid foundation for a friendship, and it lasted, what, like 6 decades?
Over 60 years, yeah. And they even served together in the Air Force Reserve during the Korean War,
Yeah.
sketching the California coastline in their downtime. That kind of shared experience, it must have been pretty powerful.
Forging that bond even stronger. So, after the military, their artistic paths kept intertwining, it seems.
Yeah, they both ended up at the Kansas City Art Institute. So they were back in the same classrooms, bouncing ideas off each other. But Camblin, he wasn't just about formal training. He was a big reader, too.
Mm.
Really into Emerson, the I Ching, and, get this, haiku and haiga.
Haiku, wow, those short little poems.
Exactly. And haiga combines haiku with visual art. So you can see how that would appeal to Camblin, right? That idea of capturing something profound in just a few words, a few brushstrokes, like that simple, evocative quality you see in a lot of his work.
Yeah, I get that. Distilling an idea down to its essence. And then there's that big turning point, that Fulbright scholarship to Italy. Talk about an immersive experience. I mean, centuries of art history, a whole new culture, must really shaken things up for him.
Oh, absolutely. He was drawn to the masters,
Yeah.
the Renaissance giants and the Impressionists, and that became a recurring theme in his work. Like he kept going back to it in his mind.
I mean, you can see why it's such a unique, visually stunning city. But it wasn't just about the beautiful stuff, right? He seemed to be drawn to the darker, more unsettling aspects of art and history, too.
Yeah, he found a certain beauty in the unusual, even the macabre. He was really fascinated by those abstract figurative sculptures in the Uffizi Gallery. And get this, the mummified remains in the catacombs of the Capuchins in Palermo. He actually called them his mummies.
Wow. That's pretty intense. You can definitely see how that Italian experience, that whole mix of influences, would seep into his work. And speaking of influences, you mentioned how he'd reinterpret classical themes.
Oh, yeah, he had this way of taking something familiar, like Botticelli's The Birth of Venus, and giving it a modern twist. Like, in his version, he even snuck in a reference to KPFT radio here in Houston. So you've got this mythical figure alongside a local radio station. It's playful, like he's winking at the viewer.
Yeah, I like that, connecting the ancient and the contemporary. And there's another one, right? Flora, inspired by Botticelli's Primavera.
Yeah, that one's full of hidden symbols and meanings. He wants you to really look closely, dig beneath the surface. It's like he's having a conversation with those Renaissance masters, but speaking in his own distinctly 20th century voice. So all these different experiences, they're starting to shape his own artistic philosophy, his style. And there's some pretty big shifts along the way, right?
Definitely. We talked about his early work in the 1950s, a lot of social commentary, bold lines, flat colors. But then things started to change, right?
Yeah, towards the mid-50s, he's kind of merging that social realism with non-objective art. Like he's wrestling with how to depict the world around him, but also, those internal subjective experiences, emotions, symbols, all that. And he's looking at artists like Cremoni, who is known for these ambiguous figures in kind of eerie landscapes. That must have resonated with Camblin, this idea of exploring the subjective, the psychological. And he was also drawn to the simple forms of Etruscan terracotta figurines.
So, Italy, those ancient cultures, all feeding into his artistic development. And then, after he gets back from Italy, there's another significant development, those large-scale drawings. They weren't
Sure.
just sketches, right? They were meant to be finished pieces.
Exactly. They were like paintings, demanding your attention. And the way he worked on them, it's fascinating. He'd actually incorporate his corrections into the final piece. Like he'd paint over sections with white gouache or even placed paper on top to make changes. It's almost like he's showing us his thought process, his constant questioning and refining.
That's cool. It's like the process itself becomes part of the art. And then as we move into the 1960s, his artistic vision seems to solidify even further. He talks about wanting to combine the poetic subtlety of Hugo van der Goes, an early Netherlandish painter, with the raw emotionality of Goya. Pretty ambitious stuff.
Oh yeah, he was always pushing himself. And the interesting thing is, the paper he used in some of those pieces, it's aged now, turned this beautiful, subtle beige color. Adds another layer of history to the work. And his a series of masks from this period, that whole series, used this layering technique with paper, building up this incredible sense of depth and complexity. It's like he's creating these multi-dimensional portraits of the human psyche.
And we can't forget about the color palette. He actually muted his colors during this time to create more harmony between his drawings and paintings. That suggests a really deliberate approach, thinking about the overall impact of his work.
Right, he wasn't just focused on individual pieces, he was thinking about how they work together as a whole. And then comes the 1970s after he moves to Houston. And this feels like a major turning point. He's actively trying to go beyond what he saw as the limitations of art. Like he's not satisfied with just the subjective, the symbolic, the decorative. He wants to create art that evokes these deep, almost mystical experiences in the viewer.
So what kind of themes is he exploring during this period?
Well, you see a lot of imagery related to the life cycle, metamorphosis, this kind of mysterious search for meaning. You've got puppets, scarecrows, skulls, even these glass reliquaries filled with murky water. It's all very evocative, a little unsettling too. And you can feel the influence of thinkers like Freud with his exploration of the unconscious, de Chirico, and his unsettling juxtapositions, the emotional intensity of Grunewald, and even writers like Kazantzakis and Grass with their complex philosophical narratives.
It sounds like he really wanted the viewer to work for it, to engage with the art on a deeper level.
Oh, absolutely. He saw his art as a puzzle, a challenge to be solved. He even purposely put in these codes and traps dead ends, visual clues that lead nowhere to force the viewer to really look, to think for themselves. He felt that too much explanation actually ruined the experience of art.
So, no spoon feeding. He wanted you to grapple with it, figure things out on your own. And he was also pushing the boundaries of reality, going beyond surrealism with those unexpected juxtapositions, those non sequiturs. I mean, he even said he wanted to remake Goya in 20th century terms. That's a pretty bold statement.
It is. And while surrealism embraced the unexpected, Camblin was disrupting narrative logic even further.
Yeah.
So you have this sense of surprise, but it's not just about shock value. He's using those techniques to make you question your assumptions about the world, to see things in a new way.
And then in the 1980s, he develops this intriguing technique of combining drawings and watercolors, creating these incredibly deep, almost illusory surfaces.
Yeah, and within those surfaces, he'd often hide images. So you have to really look closely, understand his mastery of draftsmanship to uncover the hidden meanings. It's like another layer of the puzzle, another invitation to engage with the work on a deeper level.
All of which leads us to Logjam, which feels like a key to understanding a lot of his core ideas. And it's actually discussed in that book, Zen and the Art of Enlightenment, Volume 2. And there's even that YouTube video, right, that shows us what it looks like. So, for those who haven't seen it, what are we looking at when we see Logjam?
Okay, picture this. A tangled mess of wooden pieces, broken machinery parts, swirling lines, all kinds of unidentifiable fragments all jammed together in this mostly gray, monochrome space. It's overwhelming, almost claustrophobic. And somewhere in all that chaos, you can barely make out the title logjam, like a label stuck on this visual jumble. And, immediately it evokes this feeling of being stuck, mentally blocked,
It's a
overwhelmed.
visual metaphor, right? For that first stage in the Zen ox herding pictures, seeking the ox, it's about searching for your true nature, that essential self.
Exactly. The logjam represents all the mental clutter, all those attachments, thoughts, desires that cloud our minds and keep us from seeing clearly. And the way your eye jumps around the piece, trying to make sense of it all, it mirrors how our minds work, constantly searching, grasping for meaning.
So it's not a peaceful, meditative image. It's meant to evoke that feeling of restlessness, that mental struggle.
Right. It's about that feeling of being weighed down, stuck in your own head.
Cool.
But it's also, a sense of curiosity, a desire to untangle it all, to find some kind of order in the chaos. And it's interesting because each of those elements in the logjam, the wood, the machinery parts, they can represent different things, right? Career goals, relationships, material desires.
Yeah, all those things we get caught up in that we think will bring us happiness, fulfillment.
Right. And are all piled up, blocking the way to that ox, that true self. And, the way he uses collage, those fragmented images, it's like cubism, or those found object assemblages by artists like Ernst and Cornell, they were all exploring the complexities of the human psyche through those techniques.
Yeah, it's like he's taking those ideas and applying them to this very specific concept of the logjam, the cluttered mind.
Right. And someone even pointed out that the piece has a diagrammatic quality to it, like he's cataloging all this mental debris.
Yeah.
And that limited color palette, those fine lines, it reminds you of Dürer's engravings or those scientific illustrations from the 19th century. So you have this interesting mix of artistic styles, all serving this deeper philosophical purpose.
So let's dig into those philosophical interpretations because the material you sent, it covers a lot of ground, different perspectives on logjam and Camblin's work in general.
Yeah, definitely. So from a Zen Buddhist perspective, Logjam illustrates this idea that we often think we're missing something,
Mhm.
that we need to find something outside ourselves to be happy. But that ox, that true nature, it's already there. It's our own searching, our grasping that creates the obstacle.
It's like that Zen saying, those who know do not speak, those who speak do not know. It's about that direct experience beyond words.
Exactly. And if we look at the I Ching, Logjam resonates with hexagram 39, which is called obstruction. It suggests a time for reflection, for looking inward, rather than trying to force things. And there's also hexagram 47, oppression or exhaustion, which is interesting because it says that sometimes the greatest insights, the breakthroughs, they come when we're feeling totally depleted, stuck.
So it's not about powering through, it's about surrendering to the process, even the difficult parts.
Right. And there's that quote from El Su that warns against chasing happiness externally because it'll just make you a prisoner of other people's approval. It's like building your own logjam out of other people's expectations.
Yeah, that's so true. We get so caught up in what other people think, what society tells us we should be doing, that we lose sight of our own inner compass.
And from a more psychological perspective, like what you find in the DSM, mental flow often comes from letting go. The logjam isn't something imposed on us from the outside. We create it ourselves.
Yeah.
And it only stops being an obstacle when we stop identifying with it, when we let go of the need to control everything. It's about recognizing that clarity comes when we release that struggle.
That's a powerful idea. And it ties into what the book says about Camblin's art being like visual koans, these little puzzles designed to disrupt our usual way of thinking and open us up to a deeper understanding. They call it everyday enlightenment.
Right, like little moments of awakening scattered throughout his work. And it's interesting how he brings in these themes of finding beauty in the unexpected, humor in decay, and accepting impermanence as a source of freedom. It's not about forcing things, it's about embracing the process, the whole messy, beautiful, impermanent experience of life.
And his work connects with so many other philosophical threads, too, like Alan Watts' ideas about interconnectedness, the stillness of the mind, revealing those connections, or William James, the power of belief to shape reality, those moments of sudden revelation, and Bergson, how intellect alone can't fully grasp reality, the importance of exploring the unconscious.
Absolutely. And even Jung's concept of chaos containing the seeds of order, the creative impulse coming from a place of inner necessity. Or Dostoevsky, his insights into hidden anxieties, those strange, sudden attractions we feel towards strangers. It's like Camblin is tapping into those universal, often paradoxical aspects of the human experience.
Yeah, it's not just about abstract ideas. It's about how those ideas play out in our lives, in those little moments, those unexpected encounters. And there are those more poetic interpretations of his work, too, like Updike, who said art gives us breathing room for the spirit, Or Durrell, his idea of art being a joyful reconciliation with life's wounds, fulfilling our destiny through imagination. And Huxley, reminding us that rigid consistency goes against the natural flow of things.
Right, there's this sense of embracing the fluidity, the contradictions of life in Camblin's work. And he talked about artists being in this constant struggle for their own expression, doing their own thing, in a world he felt was going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, that sense of being an outsider, a rebel, fighting for your vision. So, beyond his own personal art practice, he was also a big believer in collaboration, especially during his time in Houston.
Oh, yeah, that was a huge part of who he was as an artist. He formed this close partnership with Earl Staley and Joe Tate, and their collaborations, they called them events, were all about challenging the status quo, what people expected from art. And they even embraced anonymity, signing their joint works as anonymous or anonymous artists. It's like they wanted the art to speak for itself, without ego getting in the way.
Hmm.
In his collaboration with Nancy Giordano, that led to Mush's Volantes, a style based on using dots and dashes to create these optical illusions.
So, always experimenting, pushing the boundaries, and he was known for being a real questioner, always challenging assumptions, never taking anything at face value.
Total iconoclast. I mean, there are all these stories about him refusing payment for his work or staging these unconventional exhibitions like Money is No Object barter show, or the one called The Last Garage Sale may not be, you know, poking fun at the whole art market, the whole idea of value. And he had this complicated relationship with galleries and museums too. Felt like they often made the same mistakes as artists, getting caught up in the game.
Yeah, it sounds like he had a very specific vision for how art should be experienced. He talked about approaching art with faith and good work, seeing the art world as something that should be grounded in common sense, like cut through the BS and just create.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He had this fascinating idea that his hands had to develop an intuitive understanding, that they had to communicate with each other to find the direction of a piece. And those paintings, with the jars of water, he saw them as representing the idea of turning obstacles into opportunities, letting the sediment settle so you could see a clearer path forward.
It's like that saying, muddy water, let stand, becomes clear.
Exactly. And his Scarecrow series, inspired by Günter Grass's writing, those figures became these explorations of transformation. He incorporated unexpected elements like lobster shells, puppets, all sorts of things.
So always playing with imagery, creating those layers of meaning.
And he'd often write these descriptions to accompany the Scarecrow pieces, but the words were never straightforward. He felt that language often got in the way of the direct sensory experience of art. So the text in his paintings, it could be a clue, a distraction, or just another visual element forcing you to look harder to really see.
Always keeping the viewer on their toes, questioning their assumptions. And he even drew a parallel between his own work and remaking Goya for the 20th century. So that sense of social commentary, that unflinching look at the human condition, that was important to him.
It was. And he believed in preserving a sense of mystery, like too much explanation would ruin the power of the artistic encounter. And in the 1980s, his work takes another interesting turn. He starts integrating drawings and watercolors into these incredibly deep, illusory surfaces, often hiding images within them. You have to really slow down, observe carefully to uncover all the layers.
So in his later years, he became more reclusive, right?
Yeah, in the 80s, he and his wife Nancy moved to the Oregon coast and then to Louisiana. He did come back to Houston for a bit before he passed away, but he felt out of place, like his old life didn't fit anymore. And even after his death, there were attempts to organize a big museum show for him, but it never happened. There was a smaller show at a frame shop to help raise money after he had a stroke.
It's sad that he never got that big recognition while he was alive, but clearly he left a mark on those who knew him. Earl Staley said Camblin taught him everything he knew about drawing and painting. Penny Serling talked about his love of collaboration, his constant questioning. George O. Jackson Jr. described his art as a portal into a profound experience of art. And Carolyn Farb treasured her painting, Big Al. So his influence was real, even if it wasn't always in the spotlight.
Absolutely, he was this creative force, a bit of a trickster, someone who taught valuable lessons about art and life just by being himself.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Bob Camblin, what are the key takeaways? What do we learn from his life, his art, his unique perspective?
I think it's about that exploration of perception, how our minds work, how we see the world, how we get caught up in those mental log jams, and that search for meaning, which is something we all grapple with. And his own journey, from traditional training to that nomadic life, it all shaped his vision. This collaborative spirit, this willingness to challenge everything, and that deep engagement with philosophy, especially Zen Buddhism, works like logjam. They're like powerful reminders of the obstacles we create for ourselves, the mental clutter we need to clear away to see clearly.
It really makes you think about your own logjam, all the thoughts, ambitions, distractions that fill up your head. And Camlin's art is like an invitation to stop chasing external validation and look inward. Maybe what we're searching for has been there all along.
Exactly. And his life, his choices, they challenge our ideas about success, especially in the art world. He put his artistic exploration above everything else, even fame. And in a world where everything's so easily consumed, it makes you wonder, what's the value of art that demands your attention, makes you think, makes you uncomfortable even? Maybe the real enlightenment, like Camblin showed us, is not about finding the answers, but about embracing the questions, seeing the world with fresh eyes, constantly questioning, exploring, discovering.
That's a great point. And, maybe that's the best lesson we can take away from Bob Camblin. It's not about finding the perfect answer, the perfect image, the perfect life. It's about the journey, the struggle, the constant questioning, the willingness to embrace the unknown. And that's something we can all apply to our own lives, whether we're artists or not. So, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Bob Camblin. It's been a fascinating journey.
My pleasure. And, who knows what other hidden treasures are out there waiting to be discovered.
That's the beauty of it, isn't it? Always something new to explore, always another layer to uncover. And that's what keeps us coming back for more, right?
Absolutely. The journey continues.
Until next time, keep diving deep, folks. And don't be afraid to get a little lost along the way.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's where the real discoveries happen.
I couldn't agree more.
All right, that's a wrap.
Thanks.
Thanks for being here.
It was fun.
Yeah, it was a good one.
Camblin, man, what a character.
Total enigma. All right, see you next time.